The stagecoach kicked up dust as it rolled to a stop in front of Montrose, Colorado's only hotel, carrying with it Margaret Ellis's hopes, fears, and the burden of a past she desperately needed to outrun. The year was 1878, and like the vast Colorado landscape sprawling around her, Margaret's future stretched before her uncertain yet full of possibility. She clutched the crumpled letter in her gloved hand, the paper worn from countless readings during her journey west from Philadelphia. The driver hopped down and opened the door. "Montrose, madam. End of the line." Margaret stepped down, her legs stiff after days of travel. The small frontier town was nothing like Philadelphia's cobblestone streets and brick buildings. Here, wooden structures lined a wide dirt main street, with the Rocky Mountains providing a majestic backdrop against the setting sun. "You must be Miss Ellis," a deep voice called. Margaret turned to see a tall man approaching. His broad shoulders filled out a simple cotton shirt, and his face was partially shadowed by a well-worn Stetson. When he removed it, she noted kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, suggesting he smiled often. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. "Mr. Thornton," she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Lucas Thornton," he confirmed, extending a calloused hand. "Welcome to Montrose." Margaret placed her gloved hand in his, feeling the strength in his grip. "Thank you for meeting me. I hope your wait wasn't long." "Not at all." His eyes swept over her, taking in her travel-worn appearance. "You must be exhausted. Let me take your bags to the hotel. You can rest tonight, and tomorrow I'll show you the ranch." Margaret nodded gratefully. Lucas Thornton seemed decent enough, certainly more approachable than she had feared. His advertisement for a bride had been straightforward. Rancher seeking practical, hard-working wife, must enjoy rural life and be willing to help build a future together. Nothing about love or affection, which suited Margaret perfectly. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with the secrets she carried. "I've arranged a room for you at Mrs. Watson's boarding house," Lucas explained as he lifted her trunk. "It's more comfortable than the hotel, and she serves the best meals in town." "That's very thoughtful," Margaret replied, following him down the street. She felt eyes watching from storefronts and windows. A mail-order bride was certainly cause for curiosity in a town this size. Mrs. Watson proved to be a plump, cheerful widow who welcomed Margaret with genuine warmth. "Been waiting on you, dear. Lucas here hasn't talked about much else these past weeks." Lucas's neck reddened. "Now, Abigail, don't go making Miss Ellis uncomfortable before she's even had a chance to settle in." Margaret couldn't help but smile. There was something endearing about his embarrassment. "I've prepared the blue room," Mrs. Watson continued, leading them upstairs. "Dinner's at 6 sharp. Nothing fancy, but it's hot and there's plenty of it." Left alone in the simple but clean room, Margaret sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to breathe. She'd made it. Hundreds of miles between her and Philadelphia. Between her and Richard Blackstone. Between her and the scandal that would have destroyed her. Reaching into her bodice, she removed the folded newspaper clipping she kept close to her heart. The headline still made her stomach clench. "Prominent banker found dead, foul play suspected." She'd been gone 2 weeks by then, already halfway across the country. Margaret carefully refolded the article and tucked it back into its hiding place. No one in Montrose needed to know that Margaret Ellis had once been Margaret Everton, a finishing school teacher who had unwittingly become entangled with one of Philadelphia's most powerful and corrupt men. No one needed to know she had witnessed things that powerful people would kill to keep secret. And absolutely, no one needed to know that she had fled rather than testify, fearing for her life after the threatening notes began appearing at her boarding house door. She splashed water on her face from the basin, changed into a fresh dress, and pinned her hair neatly. Whatever happened next, she would face it with dignity. She had made it this far, after all. Downstairs, Lucas was waiting to escort her to dinner. "You look refreshed," he commented, offering his arm. "Amazing what a bit of water and a moment of peace can do," she replied, accepting his arm. His steady presence was reassuring after weeks of looking over her shoulder. Mrs. Watson's dining room hosted several other boarders, a young schoolteacher named Emily Porter, an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as Dr. Harold Wilson, and a railroad surveyor named James Miller. The conversation flowed easily, with the others politely curious about the newcomer. "What brings you all the way from Philadelphia, Miss Ellis?" Emily asked as she passed the potatoes. Margaret had rehearsed this answer countless times. "I taught at a ladies' finishing school, but after my parents passed last year, I found myself seeking a change. The East holds too many memories." Not entirely a lie, though her parents had been gone much longer. "Well, you couldn't ask for a finer man than Lucas here," Dr. Wilson chimed in. "Known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Built that ranch from nothing after coming home from the war." Lucas looked down at his plate, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "It's still a work in progress." "He's being modest," Mrs. Watson told Margaret. "Thornton Ranch is one of the most successful operations in the county. Started with just 20 acres and a dream. Now he's running cattle on over 500 acres. Margaret studied Lucas with new appreciation. His advertisement had mentioned a modest but growing ranch. He hadn't boasted about his success. After dinner, Lucas suggested a short walk. "Thought you might like to see a bit of Montrose before turning in." The evening air had cooled, and stars were appearing in the vast Colorado sky. Margaret had never seen so many stars in Philadelphia. The gas lamps and buildings obscured all but the brightest. "It's beautiful," she murmured, gazing upward. "One of the reasons I love it here," Lucas replied, following her gaze. "Makes a man feel small and significant all at once." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, passing the general store, the small church, and a saloon from which piano music drifted. "Miss Ellis," Lucas finally said, stopping near the town square, "I want to be honest with you. I know this arrangement is unconventional." "Mr. Thornton, Lucas, please." "Lucas," she amended. "I understood the terms when I answered your advertisement." He nodded, turning his hat in his hands. "I just want you to know you're not obligated to anything. If you arrive at my ranch tomorrow and find it's not to your liking, or if you decide I'm not, well, if you change your mind, I'll arrange your passage back east." Margaret studied him in the moonlight. "That's very honorable. It's only fair. Marriage is a serious commitment. Shouldn't be entered into under false pretenses or out of desperation." He looked at her directly. "I want a partner, Miss Ellis. Someone to share the work, the decisions, the future. I'm not looking for a housekeeper or—" he hesitated, "anything less than a true wife." Margaret felt her cheeks warm. "I appreciate your candor." "Good," he said, relaxing slightly. "Then I'll collect you at 9 tomorrow. Show you what you'd be getting yourself into. 9 would be perfect." He walked her back to the boarding house, tipping his hat before leaving. "Sleep well, Miss Ellis." Margaret watched him go, conflicted. Lucas Thornton seemed to be an honest, decent man, exactly what she had hoped for in her desperate bid for a new life. But did she have the right to bind herself to him while harboring such secrets? While possibly bringing danger to his doorstep, she had no answers as she prepared for bed, only the certainty that for now, Montrose was her safest option. Tomorrow would bring its own decisions. True to his word, Lucas arrived promptly at 9 the next morning with a wagon. Mrs. Watson had packed a basket for their midday meal, and the day promised to be clear and mild. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch," Lucas explained as he helped her up to the seat. "Gives us a chance to talk." As they left town, Lucas pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's settlement. Margaret found herself drawn to his evident love for this land. "Have you always lived in Colorado?" she asked. "Born in Kansas, actually. Came here after the war, was with the Union Army. Wanted open spaces and a fresh start." "You've certainly accomplished that," she observed. He shrugged. "Had help along the way. My foreman, Mike Redstone, fought alongside me. He's part Ute Indian, knows this land better than anyone. And my neighbor, Tom Miller, showed me the ropes of ranching when I was greener than spring grass." "It sounds like you've built a community." "Trying to," he agreed. "That's part of why I decided it was time to find a wife. A home needs a family." The directness of his statement made Margaret's heart quicken. "And children?" she asked softly. "If we're blessed with them," he replied, his voice equally gentle. "But even if not, two people who respect each other can build something worthwhile." They crested a rise, and Lucas drew the wagon to a halt. There it is, Thornton Ranch. Below them stretched a verdant valley, split by a clear stream. A large two-story house stood surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn. In the distance, cattle grazed on the rolling grassland, with the mountains providing a magnificent backdrop. "It's beautiful," Margaret breathed, genuinely impressed. "Started with just the cabin over there." Lucas pointed to a small structure near the main house. "Built the house over the past 3 years. Still finishing the upstairs rooms." As they approached, Margaret noticed flower beds along the front of the house, unexpected touches of beauty on a working ranch. When she mentioned them, Lucas looked slightly embarrassed. "My mother always said a house needs flowers to be a home. I'm not much of a gardener, but I try to keep them going." They were greeted by a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark hair and eyes that reflected his Native American heritage. Lucas introduced him as Mike Redstone. "About time you brought her out," Mike said, nodding to Margaret. "Maybe now he'll stop talking about you and start talking about cattle again." His serious expression broke into a warm smile. "Welcome to Thornton Ranch, Miss Ellis." Lucas showed her through the house, which was larger and more comfortable than she had expected. The main floor contained a spacious kitchen with a modern cast-iron stove, a dining area, a comfortable sitting room with bookshelves, and Lucas's office. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, 2 finished and 2 still under construction. "This would be your room," Lucas said, showing her a bright corner bedroom with windows facing east and south. "At least until—" He cleared his throat. "Well, until whatever arrangements we decide upon." Margaret appreciated his tact. The room was lovely, with a handmade quilt on the bed and simple curtains at the windows. "Did you make the furniture?" she asked, noticing the craftsmanship of the dresser and bedside table. "Winter evenings are long," he replied. "Keeps my hands busy." They ate lunch on the front porch, the basket from Mrs. Watson containing fried chicken, biscuits, and apple pie. Lucas pointed out various aspects of the ranch operation as they ate. "If you decide to stay," he said carefully, "I want you to feel this is your home too. I'm open to changes, improvements." Margaret considered his words. "You've built something remarkable here, Lucas. I wouldn't presume to change it without understanding it first." He looked pleased. "That's a sensible approach, too sensible for me to have expected in my advertisement." "Why did you advertise for a bride?" she asked suddenly. "Surely there are eligible women closer than Philadelphia." Lucas took a moment before answering. "Montrose is growing, but slowly. The few unmarried women here are much younger girls, really. I wanted someone with—" He searched for the right words. "Life experience. Maturity." And you thought you'd find that in a woman desperate enough to travel across the country to marry a stranger. The question came out sharper than she intended. Lucas wasn't offended. I thought I might find someone seeking the same thing. I am a new beginning. People come west for all sorts of reasons, Miss Ellis. Some running to something, some running from something. I don't much care which brought you here, as long as you're honest about who you are now and what you want for the future. His words struck uncomfortably close to her situation. Margaret looked away, focusing on the distant mountains. And what do you want for the future, Mr. Thornton? Lucas, he reminded her. I want to build something that lasts. A successful ranch, yes, but also a home. A place where people feel safe, welcome. Maybe children someday. A legacy beyond just cattle and land. Those are worthy goals, she said quietly. And you? What do you want, Margaret? It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it felt intimate in a way that surprised her. What did she want? Safety, certainly. Peace. But beyond that, I want to be useful, she finally said. To contribute something meaningful and, she hesitated, to belong somewhere. Lucas nodded slowly. Well, there's plenty of useful work here, and as for belonging, that's something we could build together, if you're willing. By the time they returned to town that evening, Margaret had a much clearer picture of what life with Lucas might entail. It wouldn't be easy, ranching never was, but it offered stability, purpose, and the chance for a fresh start. Outside Mrs. Watson's boarding house, Lucas helped her down from the wagon. I'd like you to take a few days, he said. Look around town, meet people, make sure this is what you want. That's very considerate, she replied. Just practical, he countered with a small smile. Marriage is hard enough when both people are certain. Margaret slept poorly that night, her mind cycling through possibilities. Could she truly start over here? Would her past eventually catch up with her? And what about Lucas? Did she have the right to bring potential danger into his life without warning him? By morning, she had reached a decision. After breakfast, she asked Mrs. Watson where she might find paper and ink. In the parlor, dear. Writing to family back east. Margaret shook her head. No family, just putting my thoughts in order. Alone in the parlor, Margaret composed 2 letters. The first was to Lucas, explaining her acceptance of his proposal with certain conditions, a trial period of 3 months before any wedding, separate bedrooms until then, and an understanding that she would contribute to the household from her savings until she proved her worth to the ranch. The second letter was harder to write. It was addressed to Elizabeth Howard, her only friend in Philadelphia who knew the full truth. In careful language, Margaret explained she had reached her destination safely and found promising circumstances. She asked if there had been any developments regarding our mutual concern, and reminded Elizabeth to use their agreed-upon code if danger persisted. She sealed both letters, the second with wax for extra security, and walked to the post office to mail Elizabeth's letter. Lucas's she would deliver personally. She found him at the general store, discussing an order of barbed wire with the proprietor. His face brightened when he saw her. Miss Ellis, I was just about to call on you. I hoped I might find you in town, she replied, conscious of the store owner's curious gaze. I've made a decision if you have a moment to discuss it. They stepped outside onto the boardwalk. Margaret handed him the letter. I've outlined my thoughts here, but the essence is that I accept your proposal with certain conditions. Lucas's eyes reflected surprise, then warmth as he read. When he finished, he carefully folded the letter and tucked it into his shirt pocket. These terms are more than fair, he said. Though I should warn you, I'm a patient man. 3 months might just give me time to convince you to reconsider some of these conditions. His teasing tone made her smile. I believe in being thorough, Mr. Thornton. So I see, Miss Ellis. He offered his arm. Perhaps we could discuss the details over lunch at the hotel. They serve a decent steak on Wednesdays. Over lunch, they hammered out practical arrangements. Margaret would move to the ranch the following Monday. She would maintain her separate bedroom, but take on responsibilities for the household and garden. Lucas would continue teaching her about ranch operations. They would present themselves to the community as engaged, with a wedding planned for the fall. "There's a social at the church this Saturday," Lucas mentioned as they finished their meal. "Might be a good opportunity to meet more townspeople." "I'd like that," Margaret agreed. The town social proved more enjoyable than Margaret had anticipated. Lucas introduced her to what seemed like every resident of Montrose, all of whom welcomed her warmly. Women offered homemaking tips for ranch life. Men congratulated Lucas on his good fortune, and several young couples shared their own stories of starting life together in the West. "You're making quite an impression," Lucas murmured as they shared a slice of apple pie. "Everyone has been very kind," Margaret replied. "Montrose looks after its own," he said simply. "Once you're here, you're family." The concept was both appealing and terrifying to Margaret. Family meant belonging, but it also meant people who would notice inconsistencies, ask questions, care enough to probe beneath the surface. As the evening wound down, Lucas walked her back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars. "I'm glad you came west," he said softly. Margaret looked up at him, studying his face in the moonlight. "So am I," she replied, surprised to find she meant it. On Monday morning, Lucas arrived with the wagon for her trunk and belongings. Mrs. Watson hugged her goodbye, pressing a small package into her hands. "Sourdough starter," she explained. "Been keeping it alive for 15 years. Now it's yours to tend." Margaret was touched by the gesture, a living link to the community she was joining. The first weeks at Thornton Ranch established a routine. Margaret rose early to prepare breakfast for Lucas and the ranch hands. Days were filled with household tasks, gardening, learning to make cheese from the milk of their small dairy herd, and gradually riding out with Lucas to understand more about the cattle operation. Evenings were spent on the porch when weather permitted, talking as the sun set behind the mountains. Lucas told stories of his childhood in Kansas, his experiences during the Civil War, and his dreams for the ranch. Margaret shared edited versions of her life in Philadelphia, her years teaching at the finishing school, books she had enjoyed. She was careful never to mention Richard Blackstone or the circumstances of her hasty departure from the East. But sometimes at night, alone in her room, she would remove the newspaper clipping and remind herself why she needed to maintain her guard, even here in this peaceful place with this good man. 4 weeks after Margaret's arrival, Mike Redstone rode in at a gallop during supper, his expression grim. "Rustlers hit the north pasture," he reported. "Took about 20 head, trail leads toward the mountains." Lucas's face hardened. "How long ago?" "Few hours at most. Tracks are fresh." Lucas stood, already reaching for his gun belt. "Get Tom and his boys, I'll saddle the horses." Margaret followed him to the porch. "Be careful," she said, her chest tight with sudden fear. He paused, turning to her. "Always am," he promised. "We'll be back by morning, likely." She watched him ride out with Mike and 3 other ranch hands, the knot in her stomach refusing to ease. In Philadelphia, danger had worn fine clothes and moved in shadows. Here it was more direct but no less threatening. Unable to sleep, Margaret kept the lamps lit and coffee brewing through the night. When hoofbeats finally approached near dawn, she rushed to the porch, relief washing over her at the sight of Lucas leading the group. "You're all right," she breathed as he dismounted. "Told you I would be," he replied, his eyes warming at her concern. "Got most of the cattle back too." Rustlers ran when they saw us coming. Only when he stepped into the lamplight did she see the bloodstain on his sleeve. "You're hurt." Lucas glanced at his arm. "Just a scratch. One of them got off a shot before running." Margaret insisted on tending the wound herself, sending the other men to the bunkhouse with coffee and the promise of a hot breakfast soon. In the kitchen, she carefully cut away Lucas's shirt sleeve to reveal a furrow along his upper arm where the bullet had grazed him. "You were lucky," she said, her voice unsteady as she cleaned the wound. "Luckier than I deserved," he admitted. "Got careless in the dark." As she bandaged his arm, Lucas watched her face. "You were worried." "Of course I was worried. You could have been killed." "Comes with ranching territory out here, Margaret." She tied off the bandage with more force than necessary. "That doesn't mean I have to like it." A slow smile spread across his face. "No, it doesn't, but it's nice to know you care." Margaret busied herself putting away the medical supplies, not trusting herself to respond. The truth was, she did care more than was wise, given her circumstances. In just a month, Lucas Thornton had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The following Sunday, Lucas suggested a picnic by the stream that ran through the property. It was a perfect early summer day, with wildflowers dotting the meadows and cottonwood leaves shimmering in the gentle breeze. "I've been thinking," Lucas said as they sat on a blanket after their meal, "about our arrangement." Margaret tensed. "Yes. We're nearly halfway through our agreed trial period. I was wondering if you'd given any thought to what comes next." She plucked a stem of grass, twisting it between her fingers. "I have. And—" his voice was carefully neutral. "I'm happy here, Lucas. Happier than I expected to be." He nodded slowly. "But," Margaret sighed, "but I'm not being entirely honest with you, and that troubles me." Lucas was silent for a long moment. "We all have parts of our past we'd rather not discuss, Margaret. I haven't asked about yours because I care more about who you are now than who you were before." "That's generous," she said softly, "but not entirely fair to you. Let me be the judge of that." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping gently around hers. "Whatever brought you west, whatever you're leaving behind, it doesn't change what I see in you now. A strong, capable woman with a kind heart and more courage than she gives herself credit for." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "You can't know that." "I believe I can." His grip tightened slightly. "I didn't plan on this happening so quickly, Margaret, but I'm falling in love with you. And if you need more time before speaking your heart, I'll wait. If you need to keep your secrets, I'll accept that too." Love. The word hung between them, both promise and threat. Could she allow herself to love this man, knowing her past might still reach out to destroy this fragile happiness? "Lucas," she began, but was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Mike Redstone appeared over the rise, riding hard. "Telegram came for Miss Ellis," he called. "Station master said it seemed urgent." Margaret's blood ran cold. Only Elizabeth knew where to find her, and they had agreed to communicate by letter unless there was immediate danger. With trembling hands, she took the telegram. "Blackstone Associates asking questions. Stop man matching Jenkins' description. Seen boarding westbound train. Stop burn this message. Stop Elizabeth." The paper slipped from Margaret's fingers. Lucas caught it, his expression changing as he read the cryptic message. "Margaret, what does this mean?" She stood, her mind racing. "It means I have to leave. Now, today." "Leave?" Lucas looked bewildered. "Why, who are Blackstone and Jenkins? People who want to hurt me," she said, gathering the picnic things with frantic energy. "I should never have stopped here, never have involved you." Lucas caught her wrists, stilling her movements. "Margaret, stop. Talk to me. Whatever this is, we can face it together." "No," her voice was sharp with fear. "You don't understand. These men are dangerous killers. I witnessed something I shouldn't have, and they've been hunting me ever since." Understanding dawned in Lucas's eyes. This is why you came west. You're running." "Yes," she admitted, too frightened now for anything but truth. Richard Blackstone was a prominent banker in Philadelphia, also a thief, embezzler, and murderer. I was teaching his daughter and overheard things, saw things. When his partner confronted him with evidence, Blackstone killed him. I was the only witness. Did you go to the authorities? I tried. The bitterness of that memory still stung. Blackstone had bought half the police force and threatened the other half. When I persisted, notes appeared at my door. My cat was killed. A fire started in my building. I knew they wouldn't stop until I was silenced too. Lucas's face had hardened. "So you ran?" "I ran," she confirmed. "And now they've found me. Jenkins is Blackstone's enforcer, his personal executioner. If he's coming west, he's coming for me." Mike, who had been keeping a respectful distance, approached. "Boss, what's happening?" Lucas kept his eyes on Margaret. "Miss Ellis is in danger. Men from her past are coming to harm her." Mike's hand moved to his gun. "How many?" "At least one," Margaret said. "Maybe more." "What do you need from us?" Mike asked, as if it were the most natural question in the world. Lucas answered before Margaret could. "We're going to keep her safe. Get back to the ranch, tell Tom and the boys. I want guards on the road and extra men at the house." "Lucas, no," Margaret protested. "This isn't your fight. I won't put you in danger." His eyes were fierce when they met hers. "The day you accepted my proposal, even with conditions, you became mine to protect. I won't let anyone harm you, Margaret. These men are killers," she insisted. "Professional criminals with connections. They won't stop." Lucas's smile was grim. "They've never tried to kill someone in my territory before." Back at the ranch, Lucas transformed into a commander. He positioned men at strategic points around the property, sent riders to alert neighbors, and dispatched a telegram to the territorial marshal requesting immediate assistance. "Jenkins won't come alone," Margaret explained as Lucas checked his rifle. "He always works with at least 2 others. They're methodical, patient." "Then we'll be more methodical and more patient," Lucas replied. "Mike knows every approach to this ranch. Tom's boys are watching the road from town. No one gets within a mile without us knowing." That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She sat by her bedroom window, a small derringer, a gift from Lucas after their discussion, in her lap. The moon cast silver light across the yard where armed men kept watch. A soft knock at her door made her jump. "It's me." Lucas's voice came quietly. She opened the door to find him fully dressed, gun belt still buckled around his waist. "You should rest," she told him. "You've been up since dawn, so have you." He leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "May I come in? Just to talk?" Margaret hesitated, then nodded. This was hardly the time for propriety. Lucas took the chair by the window while Margaret perched on the edge of the bed. "There's something I need to know," he said after a moment. "If we manage to stop these men when we stop them, will you stay?" The directness of the question took her by breath. I don't know if it's that simple." "It is to me," Lucas said. "I told you earlier that I'm falling in love with you. That wasn't just words, Margaret. These past weeks, watching you build a place for yourself here, seeing your strength and your heart, I know what I want. I want you as my wife, my partner. No more conditions, no more separate rooms. A true marriage." Margaret's heart pounded. "Even knowing what I've brought to your door. Especially knowing that you've been carrying this burden alone for too long." He leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. "Let me help you carry it. Let's write our future together, whatever comes." The words broke something open inside her, a tight, closed place where she'd been holding her fear and loneliness. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I know." He moved to sit beside her, his arm coming around her shoulders. "But you don't have to be afraid alone anymore." She leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of his body. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she confessed against his shoulder. His arm tightened. "Then that's all that matters. The rest we'll handle." For a brief moment, Margaret allowed herself to believe it could be true. That love might be enough to overcome the danger pursuing her. That this good man and the life they were building might actually be hers to keep. The sound of a dog barking shattered the moment. Lucas was on his feet instantly. "That's Ranger, he's with Tom on the South Ridge." A gunshot cracked in the darkness, followed by several more in quick succession. "Stay here," Lucas ordered, checking his pistol. "Lock the door behind me." "Lucas," he bent and kissed her swiftly. "I'll be back, I promise." Margaret watched from the window as Lucas sprinted across the yard toward the sound of gunfire. More shots echoed, this time from the direction of the road. A lantern flared to life near the barn. Unable to simply wait, Margaret pulled on her boots and took up the derringer. If Jenkins and his men had found her, she wouldn't cower in her room while others fought her battles. She made her way downstairs carefully. Through the front window, she could see men moving in the yard, but couldn't distinguish friend from foe in the darkness. The back door creaked. Margaret whirled, raising the small pistol. A figure slipped inside, not Lucas or any of the ranch hands. This man was city-dressed despite the dust of travel, with a narrow face and cold eyes that widened in surprise at the sight of her. "Miss Everton," he said silkily. "What a pleasure to finally meet in person." Margaret's finger tightened on the trigger. "Jenkins, very good," he smiled, showing too many teeth. "Mr. Blackstone sends his regards. He's quite disappointed you left Philadelphia so abruptly." "I'm sure he'll recover from the disappointment," Margaret replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. Jenkins took a step toward her. "I'm afraid not. You see, your continued existence poses a problem for him, one I've been paid handsomely to resolve." "Stop there," Margaret warned, aiming the derringer at his chest. "I will shoot." "With that little ladylike gun," Jenkins laughed. "You might hurt me, but you won't stop me." His hand moved toward his coat. Margaret fired. The derringer's report was deafening in the confined space. Jenkins staggered, clutching his side where blood blossomed on his fine coat. But he didn't fall. Instead, his face twisted with rage as he drew his own weapon. "You'll pay for that, you meddling!" The back door burst open. Lucas stood framed in the doorway, rifle raised. "Drop it," he commanded. Jenkins spun, firing wildly. Lucas's rifle cracked once. Jenkins collapsed, his pistol clattering to the floor. Margaret stood frozen, the spent derringer still in her hand. Lucas crossed to Jenkins, checking for a pulse before turning to her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head mutely. Lucas crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. "Thank God, when I heard the shot inside, I hit him," she said, her voice distant to her own ears. "But it wasn't enough. It slowed him down, gave me time to get here." Lucas's arms tightened around her. "You were brave, Margaret, so brave." Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Mike appeared at the door, bleeding from a graze on his cheek, but otherwise whole. "2 more by the barn," he reported. "Tom got one, I winged the other, but he got away, riding hard toward town." "Alert Sheriff Davis," Lucas instructed. "And check on our men." As Mike departed, Lucas led Margaret to a chair, kneeling before her. "It's over," he said gently. "Jenkins is dead. His men are either captured or fleeing. You're safe." Margaret looked at the body on her kitchen floor, the man who had haunted her nightmares for months. "It doesn't feel over," she whispered. "It will," Lucas promised. "The territorial marshal will be here tomorrow. We'll make formal statements." With Jenkins dead and evidence of their attack on a peaceful ranch, Blackstone will have a hard time coming after you again, especially once the marshal wires the federal authorities. "You make it sound so simple." "Not simple." Lucas's hands covered hers. "But possible. We can build a life here, Margaret, a good life. if that's what you want." She looked into his earnest face, this man who had risked everything to protect her, who had offered his heart even knowing her secrets, who saw strength in her when she felt only fear. "It is what I want," she said finally. "You are what I want." The aftermath unfolded much as Lucas had predicted. The territorial marshal arrived, took statements, and telegraphed federal authorities about the attack and Margaret's testimony regarding Blackstone's crimes in Philadelphia. Jenkins's surviving associate, captured in Montrose trying to buy passage on the eastbound stage, provided further evidence in exchange for leniency. 3 weeks later, a telegram arrived from Philadelphia. Richard Blackstone had been arrested on multiple charges of fraud, embezzlement, and murder. Margaret's testimony would still be needed, but she would be traveling with federal marshals for protection. "I'll come with you," Lucas said as they discussed the journey east. Margaret shook her head. "You can't leave the ranch for that long. The cattle drive is coming up, and you said yourself the new breeding stock arrives next month. Mike can handle it, Lucas." She took his hands. "I'll be safe with the marshals, and I need to do this. Face Blackstone, tell the truth. It's the only way to truly put this behind me." He searched her face. "You'll come back. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." She smiled softly. "After all, we have a wedding to plan when I return." The day of her departure was harder than she had expected. Standing on the station platform in Montrose, Margaret clung to Lucas, memorizing the feel of his arms around her. 2 months, she promised. 3 at most. Then I'm yours forever." Lucas kissed her, heedless of the onlookers and the 2 federal marshals waiting patiently nearby. "I'll be counting the days," he murmured against her lips. "Come back to me, Margaret Ellis." "I will," she vowed, boarding the train with a heart both heavy and lighter than it had been in years. The trial in Philadelphia was grueling but ultimately successful. Richard Blackstone was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life imprisonment. Margaret's testimony was crucial, but she wasn't the only witness once Blackstone's power began to crumble. Others came forward with evidence of his crimes throughout it all. Lucas's letters sustained her. He wrote of ranch life, town gossip, his progress finishing their home. Between the lines, she read his love, his pride in her courage, his longing for her return. When the verdict was finally delivered, Margaret wasted no time. She bid farewell to Elizabeth, now happily engaged to a respectable doctor, and boarded the westbound train the very next day. The journey west seemed twice as long as her earlier flight had been. Margaret spent hours watching the landscape change from eastern woodlands to plains to mountains, her anticipation growing with every mile. When the train finally pulled into Montrose, she was the first passenger to disembark, scanning the platform anxiously. Lucas stood by the station house, tall and straight in his Sunday best, his face breaking into a smile that outshone the autumn sunshine when he saw her. They met in the middle of the platform, heedless of the crowd around them. Lucas lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her down and claiming her mouth in a kiss that left no doubt of his feelings. "Welcome home," he whispered when they finally parted. "Home," Margaret echoed, the word sweeter than she had ever imagined possible. They were married the following Sunday in Montrose's small church, with the entire community in attendance. Margaret wore a new dress of pale blue silk, ordered specially from Denver. Lucas couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle on Dr. Wilson's arm. Their vows were simple but heartfelt. When Lucas promised to cherish and protect her all the days of their lives, Margaret believed him with every fiber of her being. When she promised to stand faithfully by his side through whatever challenges life brought, she knew it was a promise she could keep. Mrs. Watson hosted the wedding feast in her boarding house garden, and the celebration lasted well into the evening. As the sun set over the mountains, casting golden light across the valley, Lucas led Margaret away from the festivities toward the waiting wagon. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Thornton?" he asked, his voice rich with promise. Margaret looked up at her husband, this good, strong man who had helped her find courage when she most needed it. "More than ready," she replied, letting him lift her into the wagon. As they drove toward the ranch, their ranch now, truly, Margaret nestled against Lucas's side. "Happy?" he asked, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. "Completely," she assured him, "though I still can't quite believe it's real." "Believe it," he said firmly. "You fought for this happiness, Margaret. We both did." She thought of everything that had brought her to this moment, the fear that had driven her west, the courage it had taken to start over, the love that had given her strength to face her past. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "what would have happened if I hadn't answered your advertisement, if I'd fled somewhere else?" Lucas considered this. "I believe some things are meant to be," he said finally. "Not that they happen without effort. We still have to choose to act, to persevere. But I think you were always meant to find your way here, to me. Even with all the danger I brought, especially that," he said, surprising her. "It showed me your courage, your resilience. And it gave me the chance to prove to both of us that what we're building is strong enough to withstand whatever comes." Margaret thought of the telegram that had started it all, the paper worn thin from countless readings during her journey west. "Write our future together," Lucas had promised in that first conversation on the porch, and now they were doing exactly that. As the ranch came into view, lamplight glowing welcomingly from the windows, Margaret felt the last lingering shadow of fear lift from her heart. Here was safety. Here was purpose. Here was love, everything she had never dared to hope for. "Home," Lucas murmured, echoing her thoughts as he drew the wagon to a halt before the house, their house. "Home," Margaret agreed, turning to meet her husband's lips in a kiss that held all the promise of the future they would write together. In the years that followed, the Thornton ranch prospered. Lucas expanded their cattle operation and added a successful horse breeding program. Margaret established a small school for the children of ranch workers and neighboring homesteads, putting her teaching experience to good use. Their family grew as well. Their son James arrived the following spring, followed 2 years later by daughter Sarah. By the time their third child, Daniel, was born, Thornton Ranch had become one of the most respected operations in Colorado. The shadows of Philadelphia never again darkened their door. Richard Blackstone died in prison 5 years into his sentence. When the news reached them, Margaret felt nothing but a distant relief. The man had long since lost his power to frighten her. On their 10th anniversary, Lucas surprised Margaret with a journey to the hot springs at Glenwood, leaving the children in Mrs. Watson's capable care for a week. As they soaked in the healing waters, watching stars appear over the mountains, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought them together. "Any regrets?" Lucas asked, reading her thoughtful expression. Margaret considered the question seriously. "Only that I waited so long to trust you with the truth. Those first months I was so afraid, with good reason," he reminded her. "And yet here we are." "Here we are," she agreed, leaning back against his chest, "writing our future just as you promised." Lucas's arms tightened around her. "And it's a good story, wouldn't you say?" Margaret thought of their thriving ranch, their beautiful children, the community they had built together. She thought of the trust between them, hard-won but unshakable. She thought of the love that had grown from cautious beginnings into something deeper and stronger than she had ever imagined possible. "The best story," she said, turning to kiss her husband under the vast Colorado sky. "And we're still writing it together."